What's going on, everyone? My name is Mr. Rage22. I am really excited today because we are finally talking about one of my favorite video game franchises of all time, Gears of War. Now, I've never said this before, but this franchise was actually a very important part of my childhood. I had an Xbox 360 growing up along with a PS3, but one of the reasons why I always chose my Xbox over my PS3 was because of the very franchise we are talking about today, Gears of War. I played the first 3 games and I loved each of them so much, especially Gears 3, but we'll get to that in the next video. But Gears of War 1, dare I say it, one of the greatest third-person shooter video games of all time. And yes, even though Gears of War is part of a genre that is crowded by other third-person shooters, Gears of War still feels unique. It still feels fresh. And most importantly, it does what every video game needs to accomplish. And it succeeds in accomplishing what every video game needs to accomplish in order to be good. And that, of course, is its gameplay. A game's gameplay is what makes it good. Video games are supposed to be fun, and that is the role of the gameplay, to make the game fun. And Gears of War simply succeeds in accomplishing the most important aspect of a game, the aspect that is more important than everything else about the game, because that is the gameplay. The gameplay is what makes a game, not good graphics and not story. Looking at you, The Last of Us. No, the gameplay is what makes the game. It's what makes the game fun. When you pick up the controller to play a game, you're not playing because of story and graphics. You're playing to have a fun experience with the gameplay. It's what you experience 99% of the time you play a game. And another great thing about the gameplay is when the gameplay is so good and you're having so much fun with it, you appreciate everything else about the game as well. Like its story, its graphics, its details, its visuals. That's why gameplay is so important, because gameplay is what makes the game good. It's what makes the game fun. It's what makes the game in general. And Gears of War simply succeeds in accomplishing that important role of a game. Gears of War's gameplay and combat is absolutely incredible. It rivals some of the other greatest shooters of the genre, like Call of Duty, Doom. Although those are first-person shooters, Gears of War manages to be almost just as good as them, even though it's a third-person shooter. But it somehow feels almost 10 times better than those games I mentioned, because this game's combat is absolutely amazing. And not only that, but Gears of War is also just so unique. In other third-person shooters where you're just fighting generic bad guys like terrorists or, just generic goons, in Gears of War, you are fighting enemies that are very similar to humans, but are much more, let's just say, sinister. The Locusts are an amazing antagonist for the franchise. They are brutal and unrelenting, and that makes a great antagonist and a great bad guy for a game of its type, because they're not humans, but they're so similar to humans, and it's what makes them both terrifying and so much more threatening to the player, because they're just like humans, but they're not. They're more insidious, more aggressive, more violent, more evil. And that's what's so great about the Locust, and it's what makes such a great bad guy when compared to other generic bad guys in other generic shooters. So, the antagonists of the Gears of War franchise is already great. The Locusts are some of the best villains in video game history. And the combat is also just so amazing. Gears of War has some of the best third-person combat I have ever seen in a shooter. There's no dumbass auto-aiming, there's no stupid hit detection marks in this game. You either get good or you get wrecked. The game is also very challenging. Casuals, back the fuck off this game, because this game is not for the faint of heart. The gameplay is brutal, it's challenging, but it is also satisfying when you overcome the enemy and actually fight back in such a great way, because you need to, obviously, or you're gonna get killed. But the gameplay just, it's not too easy, but it's also not too hard. The difficulty in this game is honestly perfect. If you want a more challenging experience, you play on hardcore or insane. If you just want a more fun shooter type experience, you just play on normal or casual. Although I would not recommend playing on casual. The enemies become becomes so much easier on casual, and it kind of sucks the fun out of it. I would full-heartedly recommend you play on either normal or hardcore, because the thing about insane mode kind of turns the enemies into bullet sponges, and I cannot stand that in any game I play. I cannot stand it when the enemies take half my ammo and it's just a single enemy. So I don't recommend playing on insane unless you want an extreme challenge. But for just a fun, challenging experience, I 100% recommend either playing on normal or hardcore, especially if you're playing with a friend. And I will get to that part later, because trust me, we will. This game's co-op is also great, but for now we're just talking about the heart of the gameplay. The gameplay in Gears of War is great, and honestly, this is why Gears of War is a masterpiece. Obviously, the best part about Gears of War is its gameplay. The gameplay is obviously why the game is so good. This is not a game that relies too heavily on its story or its visuals. No, this game actually uses every great aspect of a game to make it good, and that's what every game should do. This game does what every game should do, because it focuses on every aspect that makes games good. You've got great gameplay, a great story, great graphics, and great visuals. Gears of War is almost a perfect game, which is why I'm calling it a masterpiece, as you guys can see in the title. Gears of War is such an amazing game because, like I said earlier, it accomplishes the most important aspect of a game. It does the most important aspect of a game right, and that is its gameplay, because the most important part about a game is its gameplay. The gameplay is the heart and soul of that game. So that's what makes a game good, its gameplay. And when the gameplay is good, you appreciate everything else, because you already love the gameplay and you're already having fun with the gameplay. You appreciate everything else as well. And Gears of War accomplishes that so flawlessly. Well, almost. We'll get to the game's problems in a bit, but for now we're just talking about the good, because yes, obviously I wouldn't be calling this game a masterpiece if it didn't do more good than bad, because it barely does anything bad. There's a couple of annoying segments here and there, but for the most part, Gears of War is a fun hell of a ride, which is what every game needs to be, by using the most important aspect of a game and doing the most important aspect of a game right, which is the gameplay. Now, the combat system in Gears of War, like I said, there is no auto-aiming in this game, but you do not have to worry. The game's handling of weapons also feels very, very good. And if the aiming feels a little bit off, obviously you could adjust the sensitivity. The developer's done a great job at making the player feel comfortable and giving them their own personal experience, because there's so much customizable options with the controls. If the aiming feels a little off, you could rise up sensitivity a little bit, you know? So you don't gotta worry about the fact that there's no auto-aiming. That's actually a good thing. I cannot stand shooters that have auto-aiming, because when a shooter has auto-aiming, then it's essentially playing itself for you while you're just pressing the button. That's why I love games like Doom, because games like Doom and Left 4 Dead also have no auto-aiming, and Gears of War's aiming is already great. That's already a great part about its gameplay. You don't have to worry about missing your shots too much in this game, unless you're using a sniper rifle, but that's pretty much it. This game's aiming feels great. The aiming feels great, the handling of weapons feel great, and not only that, but one of the most iconic weapons in video game history, the Lancer. Unlike in other third-person shooter games and shooters in general where you're just like a regular assault rifle, no, in this game, you use a big-ass rifle with a freaking chainsaw attached to it, and my god, this game's gore is insane. The amount of blood, guts, body parts, and brains is amazing in this game. When you rev up the chainsaw and you actually manage to literally saw someone in half, and you literally see their bodies turning into a mutilated pile of blood and gore and guts all over the floor, it feels absolutely amazing. The gore fest is incredible. If you are a gore hound and you love your gore in video games, Gears of War is already going to be one satisfying dopamine-filled hell of a ride for you, because this game's gore is absolutely amazing. Even if you're not using the chainsaw, every time you kill someone in this game, it feels satisfying. Whether you are shooting down hordes upon hordes of enemies, or getting a chainsaw with your gun and just literally cutting someone apart and just turning them into a mutilated pile of mess on the floor, it's going to feel great, especially when you use a sniper rifle. Every aspect of this game's combat feels absolutely incredible. Starting off with the weapon that you'll be using 98% of the time, the rifles. The only rifles you get in this game is the Lancer and the Hammerburst, but every time you shoot someone in this game, it feels satisfying. Every time you kill an enemy and you see their body literally fall to the ground and you see the blood and veins literally squirting out of them because you filled them up with bullets, it feels great. And you could see that blood literally spewing out their bodies. It looks so real and so brutally satisfying. It gives that player a sense that they truly are a badass, just like the game makes you look with the characters. But it also gives the player a sense of vulnerability, because there are moments in this game where you feel like you are getting overwhelmed. You'll feel like you're getting flanked. The enemies will maybe catch you off guard. But it also makes the gameplay better, because not only is the game extremely fun, but the challenge comes with those heart-pounding moments when you are so close to death and you are so close to getting down, and if you don't got a co-op partner, you're gonna die. Like, you gotta restart. I mean, it makes the gameplay feel so much better and tension-filled almost, because the game is also extremely heart-pounding, because there are moments in this game where you literally are facing hordes of enemies. It's like you are a one-man army almost, because you are literally facing almost hundreds upon hundreds of enemies. Well, maybe that's a bit of an over-exaggeration, but there are different enemy types in the game that really overwhelm the player, but that's okay, because this game doesn't need to actually overwhelm the player, because the player could overwhelm back, because there is never a moment in this game where you feel crippled. This game is all about the combat. It is all about fighting back, and it is all about applying just as much pressure to the enemy as they are pressing to you and your squad mates. And that is another great aspect about Gears of War's combat and gameplay system. Another great thing about this game is the weapons. Every weapon feels satisfying to use, whether you are shooting down tens upon 20s of enemies, like whether you are just popping and shooting with the Lancer, or you are getting a satisfying headshot with the sniper rifle, or you're just blowing up a bunch of motherfuckers with the boom shot, or even your grenade, it all feels so satisfying. Another great thing about this game, mentioning the popping and shooting thing, you know how in other shooters, how after you shoot someone, you gotta reload, and it takes a little bit, like, it's a small moment of vulnerability, because, like, obviously you're vulnerable because, like, you're reloading. Gears of War does not have that problem. Every time you reload in this game, if you could hit like this little quick time event right, you could reload 10 times faster than you would if you were just reloading normally. It is called the perfect active reload, and it basically allows you to reload extremely quickly, so you could literally pop and shoot. You could literally kill someone, reload, and then kill 2 more bad guys, and it feels so great. It literally is popping and shooting, because you could be in cover just shooting down hordes of enemies, and you could just be quickly reloading and just shooting more. There is never a moment in this game where you have to stop fighting for a minute. You are doing that almost 100% of the time. You are always in combat in this game, and that feels so good, because you are never taken out of the action. You never get that feel like, oh man, I gotta reload. Okay, how long is this gonna take? And I'm like, because in so many other shooters, like, it also takes your character a little bit of time to reload, but in this game, no. The perfect active reload is such a great part of the gameplay. It's a great part of the gameplay, because it makes it feel all the more better, because now you could literally just pop and shoot all the time. You never have to worry about being vulnerable, and you never got to worry about wasting precious time. If enemies are trying to overwhelm you, if they're trying to get up close and personal, you do the perfect active reload and you're already back shooting people. There's never a moment in this game where you are taken out of the fight when you are put in one, and it makes the game feel so great. So besides the fantastic combat, back when I said, like, there's never a moment where you're crippled in the game, in case you are getting overwhelmed, because, like, another thing, Gears of War is extremely fast-paced. Standing still in this game will get you killed. You actively have to find new places to take cover and new places to flank your enemies. Another great aspect of the game's combat is the roll mechanic. Some people find it clunky, like, I don't. I like it. The roll mechanic is a great part of the gameplay as well, because it allows you to quickly roll out of the line of fire and quickly find a place to cover, so you could quickly recover and get right back into flanking and shooting back at your opponents. So the roll thing is the roll mechanic is also really good. It also allows you to roll out of the way of enemies. Like, if enemies are getting a little too close, you could just roll out of the way. You can either roll backwards, forwards, or you could roll right or left. So you could roll in all directions. So it also gives the player a great sense of control as well, which also makes the gameplay that much more better. Another part you have is this it's like a Naruto run basically. It's basically just like a fast run you could do. You basically hold A and it allows you to quickly run into cover. So the cover mechanics is also really good. There's also blind fire, so if you're taking a little too much damage, you could just blind fire your weapon without worrying about taking damage. And that's what I mean about this game's combat. You never feel crippled. There's always something you could do. You either have the quick active reload to allow you to quickly get more bullets so you can start shooting people again, or you have the blind fire, so that way if you're getting too injured or taking too much damage, you could recover while returning fire to your enemies. So again, another great aspect of the gameplay. Another great aspect of the gameplay, because, you know, we're done talking with the combat. Now, if the combat doesn't sound good to you, then I don't know what is. The combat is obviously the very best part of Gears of War. It's what makes the game as good as it is, and like I said earlier again, that's what makes any game good. When the gameplay is great, and when the game actually manages to accomplish the best part about it, which is the gameplay, then it's already a good game, because the gameplay is what matters. That is the most important thing that a game needs to accomplish. It's the most important aspect about the game that needs to be good, because the gameplay is what matters most. And yes, Gears of War's combat is its main gameplay, but it's a third-person shooter. Okay, if you're not into shooters, don't fucking play this game. Go play, I don't know, go play Gang Beast or something, or Dead by Daylight, I don't know. This game's combat is what makes it so good. The combat feels great, it feels tight, it feels... people say this game feels clunky. I don't know what they're talking about. This game is the opposite of clunky. It gives the player plenty of control. It gives them plenty of ways to fight and return fire to their enemies, whether it's by just popping and shooting, or using a sniper rifle, or just blowing people up with a torque bow or a boom shot. If you can get your hands on one, of course. It all feels so great. The game's combat is incredible. Now, another great part about the game are its segments. Gears of War does a great job at applying that adventurous part about itself, because this game's levels and segments are great. Besides the combat, there are moments in Gears of War where you get a little bit of atmospheric exploration. And we'll talk about the atmosphere in a bit, but for now, we're going to be talking about some of the game's segments. There is never a part in Gears of War where you feel like the levels or like the environments that you're in feel the same, except for like one or two. But for the most part, every level and every new location you go to in Gears of War, they all feel different. The first segment in the game, spoilers by the way, also please play this game, it's on Game Pass, play the fucking game, play the game and come back to this review. But as I was saying, the first level, basically it's like this rundown town, it's like this rundown city, and it feels so apocalyptic. The buildings all around you, they're all crumbled. You could really feel the carnage that was once there. All of the buildings are all destroyed. And it's so gritty and atmospheric. The second part, or like the second segment, is basically like this dark, creepy town. Like it's all dark, and also not only that, but each chapter and each different segment of the game always brings in something different. The second chapter of the game has you exploring a dark, creepy town, and you are essentially being attacked by flying murderous birds that attack you when you go into dark places, which kind of adds like a horror vibe to the game. At that point, it turns into a survival horror game, because the first chapter and the first segment of the game was all about the combat and getting that gritty atmospheric sense from the first environment of all of the war-torn cities that you were in. But the second segment, you are essentially in a dark, haunted-like city where you are being attacked by evil flying birds, and the only way to survive is by shooting these fuel tanks that give you little signs of light. And that is the only way you could survive. The city that you also explore in the second town, or the second chapter, feels so creepy. It's basically a dark, haunted-like town. It looks haunted. It feels haunted. It almost is haunted because there is so much death. And again, we'll talk about this game's atmosphere in a second, because it is almost as good as the game's combat. The third chapter has you exploring a dark, creepy facility. It almost feels like a haunted facility, just like the city, but it's a really dark, claustrophobic-like facility. And in this segment, you now fight glowing wretches. Wretches are like one of the enemies that you fight in this game. They almost feel like like they're animalistic enemies, but in this segment, you are fighting glowing wretches that actually explode on you. These guys are seen way more in Gears 3, I think so. But in the first game, they're only seen in this segment, and that is kind of disappointing. I would like to see more of the glowing wretches because they are a pretty fun enemy. But yeah, in the third segment, you are basically inside underground. You are like in an underground cave, and it gives you an even creepier atmosphere. Gears of War almost feels like a horror game because so many of its segments have those horror-like have that horror-like atmospheres. So yeah, each segment of this game always brings in something new. You either get new enemies or a new environment that is fun to explore and has its own atmosphere that is different from the last place you explored with the last chapter. It almost feels like an anthology, but it also makes the game so much more adventurous because with each chapter you are getting a new environment with its own atmosphere, its own gritty, dark atmosphere, and some segments even feel like different games in general. Some segments feel more like survival horror, while others feel more like the typical shooter. And they are so good. Another part about this game's segments is the boss battles. One of my favorite boss battles is when Gears of War turns into a full-on, and I am serious, a full-on, I shit you not, a full-on survival horror game, because the first boss fight is against a horrifying, indestructible Hulk-like monster called the Berserker, and this thing cannot be killed by your weapons. You essentially have to get her outside and use a weapon called the Hammer of Dawn, and this is also a pretty cool weapon. We'll talk about the game's weapons in a second, but anyways, the first boss fight is incredible, and this is also another great segment, and it also goes back to my point about how great this game's segments are, because each segment always brings in something new. There is never a moment in this game where it is just 99% combat and nothing else. There is always a moment in this game we are going to be getting something different, whether it be new fun segments or boss battles or just some really atmospheric exploration and moments of downtime and just moments for you to take in the atmosphere and the vibe of the game. But the first boss battle with the Berserker is absolutely incredible. It turns into a creepy and horrifying game of cat and mouse, and that's not even mentioning the fact that you're inside this inside this creepy museum. It looks like a creepy museum almost, and you're essentially getting the Berserker to run at you so it could open up smashable doors to get outside. The thing is also blind, so it doesn't feel extremely terrifying, but when this thing runs at you, I shit you not, it is heart-pounding. Absolutely heart-pounding. The second boss fight is against this spider-like monster. It feels great. Each boss battle is also very challenging, and each one requires a different strategy to use. So this game's boss fights, they feel good. And the tension and the build up to the boss fights is also so great because you're not expecting it, but you know something bad is going to happen, and when it finally does, the boss fights, it's a great role to play in that aspect. So yeah, besides the game's amazing combat system, the segments are also very, very good. Now here's a small little thing, the weapons. Now in the game, you only get 3 rifles. You get a Lancer, a Hammerburst, and a shotgun. And in terms of smaller guns, you get a pistol, a revolver-like gun, you get a shotgun, you get a boom shot, which is like a grenade launcher, you get a torque bow, which is basically this game's equivalent of explosive arrows, pretty fun stuff, and you get the Hammer of Dawn, which basically shoots down like a beam on your enemies, but it can only be used outside. So for the most part, the weapon roster, you also get a sniper. I mean, I don't like using snipers in this game, so I kind of forgot about it, but sniper feels good. All the guns feel good in this game. Like, there's never a moment in this game where the guns feel sluggish or not very good to use. Each gun is good for the service that it serves. Like, the boom shot, it's a great explosive weapon. Sniper rifle, great for getting headshots. Rifles like the Lancer, good for crowd control and just good for gunfights like the Hammerburst. Shotgun's good for close quarters combat if that's more your style. Bolt-Talk pistol, good backup weapon in case your main weapon, like your Lancer, runs out of ammo. Like, it's a good back weapon. And of course, you get the typical grenades. So yeah, good roster of guns, equipment, all that's good. Of course, you get ammo packs in the game, which can be found throughout all the levels you explore, so that's also pretty good. And also, now we are going to be talking about this game's atmosphere, because we already talked about the gameplay, and the gameplay already makes this game an instant 10 out of 10. The gameplay already makes the game fantastic because how much fun it is. And again, if a game already has extremely fun combat, at that point nothing else matters. At that point, if the game has more good stuff, not just like that's just icing on the cake, And that game has that. This game has it. The atmosphere in Gears of War is absolutely incredible. It has this really dark and depressing apocalyptic atmosphere, and it is so good. While you are fighting in this game, the player gets this sense of so much depression and doubt from the game's atmosphere. Every place you explore in this game, like every segment and basically every new environment and area you explore in this game, is completely war-torn. Everything around the player is completely destroyed. Every building you see is completely destroyed. Everything has been completely destroyed. It gives you this really dark sense. Like, it gives you this like really dark, depressing, gritty sense. Even the sky looks so dark. It gives you this sense of hopelessness. It makes you feel like you're fighting a war with nothing to win. You feel like you are fighting for nothing. You feel like this war that you are fighting is for nothing because everything is already gone. And at this point, it's the end of humanity and no one's going to survive. The game has that extremely dark, depressing feel. From the way the game looks to how it plays, it all gives you this really dark sense of hopelessness and despair. Even though the game is so much fun and you feel like a badass, this game's atmosphere and vibe is fantastic because the game feels so dark and apocalyptic. It is an apocalypse game, and I feel like the rest of the Gears of War games simply didn't capture that feel, and that's why I think Gears of War 1 specifically is such a unique game, because the other games kind of failed to capture that dark and hopeless vibe of the first game, because the first game felt like that with its atmosphere, because every environment you explored in this game just felt hopeless. Like, from the abandoned, destroyed houses and buildings that you'd explore where there's nothing but just destroyed relics from the past, to the dark and creepy facility that you explore in Chapter 3. It all just feels so dark and hopeless. So the atmosphere is absolutely insane. It really adds to the game. And not only that, but the atmosphere goes hand in hand with the gameplay, because the dark and depressing atmosphere make the combat feel so much more grittier. It makes the combat feel better because it really gives you this immersive sense. It makes you feel immersed because the combat is so good that you get engrossed in everything else. And that's what I mean about a game having good gameplay. It's why a game should focus on making its gameplay good over everything else, because if the gameplay is good and fun, then the player will appreciate everything else about the game, everything else that the developer focuses on after they make the gameplay aspect good. Because when the player is enjoying the gameplay so much, they get engrossed in everything else and appreciate everything else. And Gears of War does that perfectly, because this game's fantastic combat goes great with its depressing and dark atmosphere. It makes the game such a delicious treat, and one that I would love to experience more than 100 times. Gears of War is one of my favorite games of all time, and if this review has not convinced you, then you do you, but I'm very sorry for that, because this is a game that I feel like you're really missing out on. If you haven't played Gears of War, definitely play this game. The last things I want to talk about, I guess, is the story. The story of Gears of War goes directly with its combat and its atmosphere. The story is actually pretty good too. It's nothing extremely written well. I mean, it's like, you know, it's nothing Last of Us or Red Dead 2 or GTA would be. I mean, it's your typical war story. I mean, it's different, kind of, but you know, it's decent. You know, it's not too bad. You know, it's serviceable. You know, the stories were definitely improved in the later Gears of War games. The story for Gears 1 is a bit weak, but it's a good narrative. You know, it's one that you could definitely get engrossed in, and one that is definitely interesting enough till the end. You know, it keeps you interested. So, yeah, story's all right. You know, it's not too shabby. Last thing I want to talk about, soundtrack. Soundtrack is phenomenal in Gears of War 1. It's a little typical, but you know, it's nothing Doom-like, where, you know, it gives the player this, like, you know, go kill everything rampage sense. You know, it's nothing like that, but it's good combat music. I mean, if you guys could like play your own combat music while playing the game, I would recommend it, because the combat themes are they're alright. The game also has some more creepier themes though. The game has almost this horror-themed atmospheric music that plays during the moments of the atmospheric exploration. So the game's soundtrack is good in those aspects, but the combat music, it's alright. You know, it's nothing to write home about. You know, it's okay. Last thing I want to talk about are the characters. What can I say, man? It's your typical beefy dudes going to save the world. They're great, alright? They're great. Alright guys, well that was my review for Gears of War. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Shout out to my best bud, TTV Daddy. Funny name, but he is one of my best friends. We played this game a lot, and he is actually a Twitch streamer, if you can already tell. And if you guys want, I will try and get him to do a stream of Gears of War 2, because we are going through the Gears of War franchise together. So if you guys want to see some Gears of War gameplay from me and him, I will try and convince him to stream it on his Twitch, and if he agrees, I will leave his Twitch in the comment section or the description below, whichever one you want. So yeah guys, thank you so very much for watching my review of Gears of War. Let me know what you think. Personally, to me, this game is a masterpiece. Gears of War is one of the greatest games of all time because it succeeds in doing what every game needs to do right, and that is the gameplay. And because the gameplay is so good, it automatically succeeds in everything else, from its amazing, well, not amazing, but good story, good atmosphere, and those great segments that are so different from the main game. Horror-like and just different from the boss fights. The boss fights are so good. Gears of War, great game, guys. Let me know what you think about this game. One of my favorite games of all time. I know I'm really sucking this game's dick here, but hey, it tastes great, man. If dick tastes good, I'm gonna suck it. And this game's dick, it's good to suck. So I love this game. I love this game. So let me know what you think about Gears of War. Let me know how you feel about this game. Do you think it's as great as I do, or do you think it's overrated? Let me know down in the comment section below. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and yeah, I will see you guys in the next review. This was Mr. Rage 22 signing off. Bye bye guys, and happy gaming, and have a good one. See ya.